Good afternoon. Welcome to UK Column News. It's just after 1 o'clock on Friday, the 23rd of October. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and I'm joined today over video link by oh dear goodness me, by David Scott. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello, Mike. I'm fine. I'm fine. Everyone will need to excuse the odd glitch as Mike is on his own working all of the electrical wizardry and fronting up the show. So there's a lot of multitasking going on today.
Yes, I do apologise for that. Okay, well, look, we're just going to get straight into it, David. I'm going to start off with this because the Telegraph today reporting their headline is Peers will have wings clipped if they block tax credit cuts. And they're saying the House of Lords could face new restrictions if Peers, quotes, kill George Osborne's plan to cut tax credits amid accusations they are, quotes, holding the government to ransom. And this is really a pretty incredible situation where the House of Commons, well, particularly the government, is threatening the House of Lords in this way. What Cameron is saying is that he is prepared to flood the House of Lords with Conservatives, and he's suggesting that peers consider very carefully any plans to overturn the will of the Commons. Where's the separation of powers here, David?
Long gone, Mike. Long gone. What we have here is the latest. In fact, this is a bit of role reversal. Do I not recall some point in my callow youth, the Labour government saying that they'll create 1,000 Labour peers if there's any nonsense like opposition from the House of Lords? What happens here is there's meant to be a revising chamber, there's meant to be a division of powers, there's meant to be some checks and balances. There are none. The House of Commons is an elective dictatorship. It rules, and we all have to obey the orders. I would point out from a Scottish perspective, this is an entirely alien concept, as the issue of Parliament being sovereign is in fact an English concept with no parallel in Scots law.
Well, indeed, you only have one chamber anyway, so you don't have this problem, right?
Well, we didn't have a parliament for a long time, but even before then, the parliament wasn't sovereign, the people were. And the idea that the parliament somehow embodied the sovereignty of the nation has no existence in Scots law. And it's quite interesting to note that in the law of Scotland, if Parliament introduces a law and the people think, well, that's just nonsense, we're not having anything to do with that, it is therefore not a law.
Indeed. Well, look, what I want to do is to introduce everybody to this gentleman because perhaps this whole conversation is irrelevant anyway. This is Matt Hancock, who works for the Cabinet Office, and he gave a speech on Wednesday called Future of Public Services. I'm just going to read a little bit about this. He said, today is all about the future of public services. To those here from central government, local authorities or the NHS, for most of the public, you are the public services. You are the link between the citizen and the state. In moments of need, they turn to you. So when you deliver, you can make the biggest impact. My case is we need continuous improvement in public services, and for that we must reform the relationship between citizen and state. He went on to say, in short, we must build a truly 21st century state, smarter, nimbler, more responsive and more accessible. The technology exists to do it, and the public expect it. It is our duty. He said, let's take commercialization first. Public or private, in-house or outsourced, these tired old binaries fail to capture the complexity of modern life. It's an increasingly futile debate because the truth is we can have the best of both. We can have the public service values and financial discipline and an entrepreneurial drive that is driven by more than money. It's why at the Cabinet Office, we're supporting organisations across government to explore new commercial models for assets and services. Sometimes this involves bringing together public and private sector partnerships with complementary skills. Take Crown Hosting, a joint venture between HM Government and ARC data centres. In the past, data hosting services were expensive because departments built or procured their own bespoke products. By contrast, Crown Hosting provides a service that can be used by the whole of government. So what's he talking about? Data in the cloud. Let's talk about that maybe today. But here's the really scary bit of Hancock's speech, because he went on to say, and it brings me to my second area of reform, experimentation. because in seeking to improve our services, we need to know what actually works. We've always had policy pilots, but we're now putting on our lab coats, testing our variations of a policy against a hypothesis. Test, try small, fail fast, and learn. It's part of the secret of continuous improvement. Famously, the Behavioural Insights team, itself a Cabinet Office spin-out, are doing this with behavioural science. Among other things, they've discovered how to reduce human error in hospital prescriptions, how to improve take-up of business support schemes, and how to increase the chances of teenagers in Somerset applying to university. This is all brilliant, but he's talking about experimentation in public services, which affects people's lives on a daily basis. So he says they're going to iterate, and iterate again. This is brilliant. And then he goes on to say, but if we're going to unlock the transformation, our services require digital transformation, and this is the third frontier of reform I want to talk about. And so he goes on. This was an incredible speech, but what was increasingly clear, David, is that this country is already a dictatorship. Never mind what's going on in Scotland. It's being run by the Cabinet Office.
Well, that's fascinating, Mike. Actually, that is so. That is exactly what's been going on in Scotland. That is the Scottish model of government. Welcome to Scotland. You're all going to be Scots soon. Not in a good way. Everything there, every single word of that is the Scottish model of government. It's repeating what Sir John Elvidge had said and what has been rolled out in Scotland. Every single bit of it. It's so full of error, and I almost don't know where to start. But the key word there is almost. Let's start with the best of both. That's an easy one. We've got this thing called state, and we feel a bit ambivalent about that because it's based on force. And we've got the thing called the free market, which is based on liberty. But some people feel a bit ambivalent about that because it's sometimes, the bad things happen. And we've got this other option, the third way, the best of both, the union of the state power and entrepreneurial expertise. There's a name for this. It's called fascism. That's the third way. It always has been. The only limitation, the reason the free market works is you're harnessing the natural tendencies of human beings to want to improve their position, to want to improve their own experience, their own lives, their surroundings, their family, the ones they care about. And you're harnessing that in a manner which means they can only do that by serving one another. And that only works where there's competition, where there's choice, where there's liberty, where there's freedom. The minute you put in state into that, you bring in coercion, you bring in the threat of violence, you bring in government regulation. What you do is you change the whole dynamic. It becomes who you know, not what you know. It becomes who you can stop competing against you, not how hard you can try. It utterly undermines the whole thing and makes it a matter of corruption and graft and rent-seeking. That's what they're after. That's what they're going to achieve with this. They will point to the failures in the state, and the failures of the state surround us daily. They will point to the successes in the free market, and they'll say, oh, if only the state could have some of that free market expertise and temper it with the loving, caring thing that we all know the state is, Mike, then everything would be wonderful. Don't fall for it. It's fascism. It's just presented in a way without the nice uniforms designed by Hugo Boss.
Indeed.
Secondly,
okay,
let's see, where we go next. The citizen in the state and continuous improvement. Now, this is a wonderful one. Continuous improvement. This has come out of America. It's called the enabling state. We've had it in Scotland. We're constantly running small tests of change on our children in Scotland. They are being experimented on daily in multiple places, and it all comes from the work of Walter Deming, the guru of continuous improvement, who was extremely successful post-World War II in revolutionary change in the manufacturing industry in Japan, which used to be synonymous with rubbish. and became extremely good at making engines and cars and a whole lot of other things. And they did it by continuous improvement of the process by which they made the production possible. There's nothing wrong with continuous improvement. It's a very good system as a management tool. It certainly has its role. Now, what they will not tell you is in the model that we've seen in Scotland of continuous improvement, the improvement is being applied to the product. And the product, Mike, is you and me, and particularly your kids. They are the product. Okay? They're not improving the process, they're improving the product, and the product is us. Watch this one very carefully.
Indeed. Okay, look, we're going to move on to Scottish issues, and we'll start off with Sheikh Ubeo again. And Kenny McCaskill, it seems the ex-Justice Secretary, has really been pretty horrendous in his comments on this.
Kenny McCaskill has. Kenny McCaskill was writing, I discovered today actually, for a newspaper relating to, or a newspaper for the police. You know, it's a police internal newspaper. And he wrote that he was sure that the inquiry into the Sheikh Ubeo case would conclude that there was no wrongdoing and it was all an accident, and then terribly sad and all that, but, you know, no one to blame. Let's move on. So he said that publicly during the point when PERC, the police investigators, are currently investigating the case.
So how could he possibly know that?
Well, I wondered that. I suggested on Twitter that dear Mr. McCaskill might be seeking to influence the investigation, and I got immediately blocked by him on Twitter, so he obviously didn't like that. And it's been well reported in the press, and it's been viewed very poorly by the press, by the Sheikh Ubeo's family, by Sheikh Ubeo's lawyer, his family lawyer, and Mr. McCaskill has come under some pressure. Now, a couple of quotes in the press just today. The Lord Advocate, Frank Mulholland, he had called publicly for an end to speculation and commentary on the case. Speculation and commentary would be what Mr. McCaskill, former Justice Secretary, was busily engaged in as that call was being made. Mr. Beale's sisters have called on First Minister Nicola Sturgeon to investigate Mr. McCaskill for bullying and claiming that his comments have been brutal and barbaric. And they also went on to say, and I thought quite critically, about these comments, that it gives us, that is the family of Sheikh Ubeo, no hope of truth and justice in Scotland. Now, as all of the team up here who have been fighting for justice for Holly Greig will tell you, the feeling that there is no hope for truth and justice in Scotland is one that is actually quite common in this land. It's held by anyone who runs against the wishes of the state. The Sheikh Ubeo family have done magnificently well getting as far as they have done, and there's a lot of pressure on the government to actually do their job. So let's hope they do actually conduct a full and proper investigation. A couple of other things quickly on this. Mr. McCaskill made his comments about it just being a tragic accident. The Crown Office in PERC, we were then assured by Mr. Mulholland, are not influenced by comments made in the media, which is good to hear. And a decision will be taken on this extremely complex investigation as to whether or not criminal proceedings should be raised. So criminal proceedings against the police officers concerned are at least and formally and officially being considered, as indeed they should be. And the lawyer, Mr. Anwar, the lawyer for Sheikh Ubeo's family, said the Bales are grateful for the intervention of the Lord Advocate and hope that those who should know better will stop declaring publicly that there will be no criminal proceedings when there is an ongoing investigation. This newspaper, which is the Scotsman, concludes Mr. McCaskill was unavailable for comment. So that was reported. We have here a newspaper headline today, the Scottish Daily Mail. Police may be charged over death of father. So it is being reported in the Scottish press. They are awake to this. They are reporting it front page, banner headlines. So there's a lot of pressure on the police. And one other little thing that I should point out regarding the role of a certain lawyer you might be familiar with, Mike, a certain Mr. Watson. Earlier this week, Mr. McCaskill, this is from today's Herald Scotland. Earlier this week, Mr. McCaskill accused campaigners and commentators of creating a poisonous atmosphere in which individual officers have been targeted. His comments were welcomed by Professor Peter Watson, the lawyer for the police officers involved in the case at the time. However, Mr. Anwar said following the Lord Advocate's comments, the family were sickened by the comments of Mr. McCaskill, who really should know better. He tried to silence the BAOs and went on himself to predict that there would be no criminal proceedings and claimed it was all an accident. When a man is dead and his family are grieving for his loss, the last thing they need is an ex-Justice Minister predicting publicly the outcome of an investigation. And it says here, Mr. Watson declined to comment. So no comments from Peter Watson, no comment from Mr. McCaskill, and perhaps an inquiry or a reprimand from Nicola Sturgeon to her former Justice Minister. We will see.
Yes, okay. Well, of course, we mentioned this yesterday, but I'm going to ask you for comment on it as well, and that is, when people do die in custody, a terrible thing, the person that you put in charge of any kind of review into those deaths or into the procedures that led to those deaths should be put in the hands of probably the most capable person in the country. Would that not be true?
That would certainly be true.
So clearly you would put it in the hands of Dame Eilish Angelini in that case.
Well, I have to say at this point, maybe a point that wasn't clear. This is only English cases that will be explored by Dame Eilish Angelini. And
so what, Scotland's exporting what?
Scotland's exporting Dame Eilish Angelini and oil. Not as much of that, but lots of Dame Eilish Angelini. So you've got her. We're not having her back now. So you can keep her. Dame Eilish Angelini is obviously very controversial, not just over the Holly Gregg case. She was an extraordinarily controversial Lord Advocate. She was viewed as an experiment gone disastrously wrong. Many of the leading advocates, QCs in Scotland, spoke out about the tragedy that was represented by her position as Lord Advocate and the fact that the ancient safeguards in the Scottish criminal justice system were trodden over, and that, to quote one QC, our system of justice was going to hell in a handcart. So that's the person you've got looking after inquiries into deaths in custody. The specifics of the Holly Gregg case were that when Dame Eilish Angelini was appointed to a position of the Chief Prosecutor, the Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen, Holly, who had previously made accusations against her father and brother, accused a wide range of people of being involved in her abuse in a large and organised paedophile ring. That range of people included a sheriff who was operating in that jurisdiction and was in fact well known personally to Dame Eilish Angelini, not Dame then. But despite this, and despite the fact that she engaged in correspondence regarding this case with lawyers, MPs and others, she later claimed to have no involvement and or recollection of the case. She also, it was claimed by a senior officer within the Crown Office, had nothing to do with the subsequent decision in 2009 after the involvement of Robert Greene reopened the case to drop it once again, despite the fact that we were then told, Robert Greene was then told, by someone within the Crown Office, that she had in fact made the decision. And this was later confirmed by the Justice Secretariat in writing. Robert Greene looked at these issues and concluded that this was evidence that Dame Eilish Angelini had not done her job properly. He made this abundantly clear and said so outspokenly. And as a result, he was sued by Dame Eilish Angelini. Now, this case, Dame Elish won this case, and the courts in Scotland decided that Robert had libelled her, had made untrue statements when he concluded that the facts I've laid before you were evidence of some form of cover-up. But we must remember that during that case, Robert was denied legal aid, and Dame Elise Angiolini had secret financial support from the Crown Office, who were picking up all of her legal bills. We therefore had a gross inequity of arms, and we have to look at that case and remember that that situation occurred then. So that's the rough background to Dame Elish. You've now got her looking after deaths in custody. How do you feel about that, Mike?
Well, maybe she is one of the Cabinet Office's experiments.
You might say that. I really couldn't possibly comment.
Yeah, good stuff. Right, look, let's move on. Project Syndicate website here hosting a post, The Path to Carbon Pricing, by Christine Lagarde from the International Monetary Fund and Jim Yong Kim from the World Bank. And they're saying in just 6 weeks, world leaders will meet in Paris to negotiate a new global climate change agreement. To date, 150 countries have submitted plans detailing how they will move their economies along a more resilient, low-carbon trajectory. These plans represent the first generation of investments to be made in order to build a competitive future without the dangerous levels of carbon dioxide emissions that are now driving global warming. And what they go on to describe is how their axis of evil, the World Bank and the IMF, will use their terms and conditions for capital loans to countries, mainly third world countries, of course, to impose fiscal rules which will tie those countries into their sustainable development agenda. So it's blackmail for the Paris conference, in other words. But on this subject, I just want to highlight this post on the Activist Post website, Agenda 2030, bankrupting the third world one country at a time. And I suggest everybody goes and reads this. It begins, the destiny of Africa has for centuries been usurped by conquerors, whether it be the East India Company's mercantile slave trade, the imperialistic campaigns of Cecil John Rhodes, or the IMF's economic hitmen of today, the eugenic aims of the Anglo-American establishment towards the people of Africa, and the vast natural resources they sit upon has continued unabated for hundreds of years. Agenda 2030 is set to take the subjugation of Africa to previously unimagined heights, with the rest of the third world to follow shortly after. Well, I couldn't agree more. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, well, the whole global warming scam has been going on. And the one thing that's not been happening, obviously, is global warming. That's why we're not allowed to call it global warming anymore. It's climate change, because the climate keeps changing, as opposed to climate variation. And they've actually defined the difference between the two terms. Climate variation is the climate changing naturally. Climate change is climate changing due to man-made fossil fuel use, etc. And how you tell the difference? Well, I don't really know.
I don't think they really know either.
No, and one thing we know is that we have endless excuses for taxation, endless excuses for preventing third world countries developing, and we're going to mire a lot of people in poverty who would otherwise work their way out of poverty. And what's the agenda here? It's certainly not to save the planet.
Well, indeed. So we'll bring this up again because we mentioned this the other day, but I always find it interesting when a particular name of an individual crops up more than once. This was on Monday. We highlighted this publication, a policy document which calls for developed nations to commit to 0.02% of their GDP for 10 years to fund coordinated research into renewables in Africa. Now, this strangely enough, is the same policy which is now being pushed by the government with their Energy Africa campaign. This was launched yesterday by the International Development Minister, Grant Shapps. And they say that that's going to help Africa to achieve universal energy access by 2030. A reliable electricity supply is one of the most powerful tools for lifting people out of poverty, apparently, and ending dependency on aid. Now, I think the key point to recognize here, of course, is that, as you just said, Africa is not to be allowed to develop, so it's going to be kept in poverty, and we'll throw them a bone with some solar panels or something over the next few decades. so they can at least see in the dark while they're all starving to death. This kind of reminds me of the attitude of the BBC, actually, because they produced a program a couple of years ago called Swimming with Crocodiles. It was a sort of natural history thing. And they pointed out that crocodiles from time to time take people from the riverbanks while they're there collecting drinking water. And the BBC's solution to this wasn't to suggest that we actually install some pipes and pipe water somewhere sensible. No, their solution was to put some signs up saying, "Warning, crocodiles." As if the local people aren't aware that the crocodiles are there and that it's kind of dangerous. So that's the attitude of the BBC and of the British establishment, the Western establishment to Africa. But anyway, getting back to the Apollo program, we have a look at the names on there. We've got David King, we've got John Brown. Now, John Brown, of course, that's Lord John Brown, ex-BP, total hydrocarbons man. So he clearly believes that Africans should not have access to hydrocarbons, which might seem a bit ironic, bearing in mind who he is. We've got Gus O'Donnell on there. We've got Martin Rees, Nicholas Stern, and we've got Adair Turner. He is on this, pushing this agenda. And yesterday we mentioned this, the Strong Cities program, and we pointed out what this was. It was basically global governance of cities right around the world via best practice documents. And of course, they're using violent extremism as the driver to impose this global governance at a local level. So what's this got to do with Apollo, with the global warming program? Well, this is being pushed by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and none other than Adair Turner is, I should say that the Institute for Strategic Dialogue calls themselves a think and do tank. So they're not just a think tank, they're also a do tank. But Adair Turner, in fact, is very senior within that. He's the chairman of their governing board, in fact. What else is he? Well, he is Baron Turner of Eccleswell. He is a member of the UK's Financial Policy Committee. He was chairman of the Financial Services Authority until its abolition. And he was chairman of the Pensions Commission. So he's done pretty well there, bearing in mind the £5 trillion black hole in public and state pensions, and the fact that even private pensions are now so underfunded that they aren't going to pay out. But the Institute for Strategic Dialogue drives this little organisation. Adair Turner is also a member of this organisation, the Institute for New Economic Thinking. And what's this? Well, this is a George Soros body, it was founded in 2009 following the financial crisis. Its mission, apparently, is to nurture a global community of next-generation economic thinkers, to provoke new economic thinking, and to inspire the economics profession to engage the challenges of the 21st century. And it's supplemented by donations from James Bazley, William H. Janeway, other philanthropists, including Paul Volcker, David Rockefeller, the Malcolm Hewitt Weiner Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation. The usual suspects are all there. And its executive director is Robert Johnson, who's the former managing director of the Soros Fund Management and Moore Capital Management. And they say, by funding academic research, building communities of innovative scholars, and spreading the word globally about the urgent need for change, we are creating real-world solutions to the great challenges of the 21st century. Our work supports the efforts of scholars all over the world as they change the way economics is studied, considered, and taught. So here's one of the programs that they fund, the Human Capital and Economic Opportunity Global Working Group. And they say that they connect cross-disciplinary experts to advance innovative thinking and approaches to inequality and human capital development research designed to improve individual opportunity worldwide. Founded in 2010, the Human Capital and Economic Opportunity Global Working Group is a collaboration of over 400 researchers, educators, and policymakers focused on human capital development and its impact on opportunity inequality. And as you can see there, the type of things that they're into: early childhood interventions, family inequality. So here we have Adair Turner, who is into global warming. He's into city-states and global governance. and he's also into funding early childhood interventions and family inequality. This man is godlike, is he not?
Well, he certainly wants to be. And yeah, let's just go through a few things that you covered there. You covered a huge amount of really important points. Just to start with the global warming scam. I hope everyone remembers a few years ago, the last time we had a very big conference in Europe. It was at Copenhagen, where all these people from around the world came to discuss how to plan the world's temperature down to fractions of a degree 50 years from now, and had to rush home to deal with snowstorms and record low temperatures. So since we're doing this again, it might be a good time to get your winter woolies on. And I would also point out that Al Gore has a beachfront mansion right down in the ocean and he spent millions of dollars on it. He does not expect the ocean to go up by several meters. He's just lying to you. As far as Africa is concerned, Africa needs to be free from our help. It's our help, I suspect, in many ways, certainly the help of the World Bank, that's holding them back. I saw that someone had done an experiment to see how the uptake of new technology would work in remote parts of Africa, and they dumped a lot of laptops in a very remote village, obviously with some sort of power source, but those kids had never seen these things before in their lives. They gave them no instructions, didn't even tell them how to turn them on, and just left them there, and went back less than a month later, and not only had the kids, only been playing with the cardboard packaging for a few hours, found the laptops, found the on button. By the time they came back, they had not only discovered the internet, but they discovered that the operating system had been set to turn off the camera within the laptops, and they'd hacked the operating system and turned the cameras back on. So I have a lot of hope for Africa if they can simply have some freedom, some property rights, the ability to actually interact with one another without some government or some warlord stealing their stuff. I think they'll do fine without our help. Now, new economics is usually ever since 1936 and the Keynes general theory. New economics means a new excuse for doing what the government already wants to do, which normally involves looting people and dividing them in large and small ways. So that's what we can look for the new economics. The old economics is about 400 years of careful, patient thought. There is a great deal of insight to be gained from that, but it doesn't give the answers that our big government friends wanted to give. It gives the answers that actually we do quite all right when we're left alone. And then we come to inequality. Now, we hear an awful lot about this in Scotland because the SNP government are always telling us that we need to be a more equal society. The problem with Great Britain and Westminster is making us unequal. It's very unfair. Life is unfair. And we need to be equal. Now, equal means the same. And I would point out that human beings are in fact all different. If you introduce a rule where everyone is equal, what do you do with the ones who work hard? Well, you have to stop them or steal their stuff. What do you do with the ones who are interested in different things and value different things? Well, their values need to be changed. Equal means controlled. Equal means, to some extent, a slave. Equal means the state is involved in your every thought, because ultimately, equal means there is no liberty.
I don't think I could improve on that. So I think we'll leave it there. Brilliant, David. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to Alice through the looking glass. What are you highlighting here?
Let's see. There was quite a lot. This would be the complaints process for the named person scheme. If anyone out there is, particularly anyone in Scotland, who wants to contribute to the consultation process, the Scottish Government is currently consulting us on the complaints process. Now, The actual consultation is asking us to what we think of two government proposals. One, that there'll be a long and convoluted complaints process involving each individual department, or secondly, there'll be a long and involved complaints process involving the named person coordinating it. Ultimately, it involves going back to the state and saying to the state, you have hurt us and wronged us. Please don't hurt us anymore. Please accept that you were wrong and treat us less cruelly. Master. Essentially, that's what the process is. There's no independence. The complaints process is entirely in-house. There is appeal only to the ombudsman, and the ombudsman's views can be ignored by local government. The complaints process involves no checks and balances on what the state does. The state will do what the state wants. And the named person scheme, which obviously looks after the happiness, the well-being, the everything of every child, which is inherently intrusive into family life, it is not limited in any way by the complaints process. So if you can, before the 30th, drop them a little line and tell our wise overlords that. They won't listen, but it's quite fun to see how they try and wriggle out of the fact that all of the consultation processes come back with the great majority of the ordinary people who respond saying, we don't want this, leave us alone.
And speaking of your great overlords, how did it go at the SNP conference on this subject?
Well, the good people from the No to Name Person campaign were there again. I wasn't actually at that one. But yes, they were there with the red shirts and leafleting the people going into the No to Name Person conference. And yes, I don't think the SNP are tremendously happy about it. We occasionally see on the No to Name Person have got a Facebook page, and it's got a quite an active discussion page on that. And you occasionally see people coming in supporting the named person scheme. And there's not many of them, and they tend to lose the argument quite quickly, but you do see them. And occasionally you've got someone comes in with a quite unusual name, so you can actually find out who they are. And the last time I saw one with an unusual name and we could Google him, he turned out to be someone with a background as a researcher for the SNP. So there is... they're toiling to find ordinary people to actually back this scheme. They can find people to pay. You know, you'll find people in the teaching profession and in the particularly high up in the teaching profession whose careers depend on saying this is a good idea. They will say it's a good idea. Ordinary people, not so much.
But it is now in the Scotsman that perhaps it's a good idea.
Well, yes, this is the part of the fight back. We had an Alistair Gaw who is, as you see here,
that would be this Alistair Gaw, would it?
This Alistair Gaw, and is that a named person graduate I see before me? I think it could be
a common purpose graduate.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. A common purpose graduate. Yes, common purpose graduate Alistair Gaw, and head of child protection, etc. in Edinburgh, is now in overall charge of the organisation which heads up the leaders of social services in Scotland.
It looks like when he took that course, that common purpose course, he was head of 21st century social work, and that gives me a warm feeling.
Well, indeed, yeah. The 21st century is a very interesting concept. Whenever it starts, because I understand in the 21st century nothing bad happens. So whenever it starts, I'll give you a call and let you know.
Now, what did you say he's doing now?
Well, he's also head of the president of Social Work Scotland, which is the head organisation for the people who head up, not the rank and file social workers, but the leaders of social work in Scotland. So he's the president of their organisation, and he's also head of support to children and young people for the city of Edinburgh. So
surely, everything would be going very well in Edinburgh with this kind of leadership.
You would have hoped that a common purpose graduate would actually have everything going quite smoothly, but as you see here, there have been issues. This is the very sad case of Michael Kumar and of Erin Sutherland. Yeah. And these are people who were known to social services, in the case of Ernest Sutherland, who was appealing for help, begging for help, and help was denied. In the case of the small boy, Kumar was known to social services, and essentially the issue was missed. It's interesting to note that of the people who end up with serious case reviews in Scottish social service, 97% are previously known to social services and have something bad has happened under the social service watch. And only 3% are not known to them. So the constant argument that we hear, and which was repeated by Mr. Gaw in The Scotsman, that we must have universal state surveillance of all families. Doesn't quite put it that way, but that's what it is. Because otherwise, children could slip through the net. Bad things could happen, and we don't want that, so we must have this scheme.
Yeah, okay.
Ignores the fact that 97% of the people where bad things happen are known to them, and they're not slipping through the net. It's simply that either people in social services and other state organisations are not doing their job, or that the human condition is sufficiently complex that the job is not doable or not doable with perfection, and that unfortunate situations will continue to happen. The idea that the state can stop it is flawed, and the idea that state surveillance of all families will come without cost, without damage, is likewise untrue.
Yeah. Okay, and you wanted me to include a blog in the Scottish Review from Kenneth Roy. What was your...
Yes, Kenneth Roy, a very mild-mannered gentleman, ex-BBC, and he's a journalist, and he speaks and writes and broadcasts. He's kind of come out of the sort of BBC inner circle and is sort of more sort of independent now, but is well respected and well known and has been on the scene. I'm sure I can remember him as I was a small boy. He was on the television. He might resent that comment, but he seems to have been around forever. And generally, like the majority of the Scottish the thinking part of Scottish journalism was very supportive of moves towards more independence within Scotland, towards devolution, towards independence or a greater degree of independence. And he's now found himself under attack from the nasty, virulent cyber nats, they're called, the aggressive wing of Scottish nationalism, as are other people, including Muriel Gray, who's a very intelligent writer on matters Scottish, and who has been over many years very supportive of moves towards independence. She's now been told to F off over the border via Twitter, and is coming in for huge abuse because, like Mr. Roy, she is unhappy and uncomfortable with the nature of nationalism, or some branches of it, as it's been seen in Scotland. I was given this little quote here today, which I'll read briefly. It's from a book on philosophy written by an American called Brand Blanchard. It's called Reasons and Analysis. Written in the 60s, the sort of last bit of American philosophy that was worth reading, I suspect. He talks here about sometimes intellectual aversion in the artist passes over into a conscious creed. It was so with D.H. Lawrence. And he quotes Lawrence here. He says, quote, "My great religion is a belief in the blood, flesh, as being wiser than the intellect. We can go wrong in our minds, but what our blood feels and believes and says is always true. The intellect is only a bit and a bridle. What do I care about knowledge? All I want is to answer to my blood, direct, without fribbling intervention of mind or moral or whatnot," end quote. And he goes on to comment, "Does this sound exhilarating? Many in our time have found it so. The trouble with it is simple. And once the anchor of reason has been cut, one's craft may go anywhere. one may become a St. Francis or equally a Hitler, who was notoriously adept at thinking with his blood. It is more likely that one will become neither, but merely a tiresome freak. As Maurice Cohen remarked, not all who rave are divinely inspired. And that, I feel, sadly, applies to some elements within Scottish nationalism today.
Indeed. Okay, and finally on Scottish issues then, you wanted to mention this. What is going on with home education? Borders Council to tighten home education, and the BBC here is saying the Scottish Government will be asked to tighten legislation allowing parents to educate their children at home. Local authorities are obliged to ensure parents are providing schooling suitable to age, ability and aptitude. However, parents are not legally required to tell the council they home educate their children, and they go on to say that they don't need to get permission for home education. And in fact, they're suggesting that people fall under the radar here because children may never have attended a state school in the first place. Children may never have attended a state school in their new authorities area. The children who are withdrawn from an independent school wouldn't be noticed. Children who finish primary education in one school but have not started secondary education in another, and children who have been attending, the school that children have been attending had closed, and that under all these circumstances, children might fall through the cracks, be lost to the system. And this Scottish Borders Council here says that these various loopholes make it difficult to ensure all children receive an adequate education. And when I read that, I kind of thought to myself, what defines an adequate education? Because I don't see much evidence of adequate education through the mainstream education system at the moment.
Oh, the education system's a disaster. It's a disaster in England. It's a disaster in Scotland. I saw this week, Andrew Neil in an interview with a Scottish National Party member of Parliament, commented to that person that for the first time ever, schools in Scotland are underperforming schools in England, and he wasn't contradicted. So there's a crisis of education all around the land. Yes, and what do they mean by education? Well, we probably haven't time to go into that, but it's quite an interesting story when you do go into it.
Yeah.
And we're not finding huge hordes of uneducated homeschool kids in Scotland. That's not what happens. If you go down the street and you're mugged by some teenagers, it's not the gangs of homeschoolers that are doing this. It's people who have been through a state system that's turned them off to society and who are on the margins of society as a result. It's people who have been failed by state education. But nonetheless, there seems to be this attack on homeschooling. Homeschooling is coming under a lot of pressure in Scotland because, well, the named person finds it quite hard to get a handle on this, because who exactly is your named person if you homeschool your child? You don't have a head teacher. Oh, that's obviously not sitting well with the government. There's a possibility that they won't actually have a file on you. Can you imagine such a horror, Mike? That your children won't be represented in a file in the local town hall?
Well, I can't imagine that at all, because surely my children would not be safe without such a file.
Well, because you could be an abuser. We don't know. You could be terrible. The people in the town hall, they can't be abusers, apart from the ones which are, but they're all individual cases of individual rotten apples. And therein lies the problem. We are seeing a government that is terrified of what we would call freedom, of people making up their own minds, living their own lives without state supervision.
Yes, indeed. Okay, look, we're really running out of time, David, so I'm just going to end on the Scottish side of things now and just mention one more story, if we can. Now, yesterday, Brian was talking about the extremist agenda and so on, and what we did is we took that little section out of yesterday's news programme and put it on the UK Column YouTube channel. I'm just going to ask everybody if you can get that as widely distributed as you possibly can. You can go to the UK Column YouTube channel and you'll find it there.
It is excellent, and it's been tweeted all around the world already, I know.
Yeah, it has indeed, yes, okay. So anyway, as I say, Brian highlighting the issue of the so-called extremism agenda and how it's being used to turn Britain into a Stasi state. Now, one of the areas which was listed so that people could make a decision about whether or not 2-year-olds were expressing extreme views, was whether or not they express British values. Well, it seems that we can now learn all about British values if we wish, or at least if we're teachers, because Go Givers here are running training courses on the subject. So, making sense of British Values Training Day. What are British values and how are primary school teachers expected to promote them? What is Ofsted looking for? How can schools demonstrate that they are actively promoting fundamental British values and placing SMSC development at the heart of the school's work? Our full-day courses will provide an opportunity to explore the British values requirement and learn about ways that schools can foster inclusive understanding of Britishness that embrace diversity and become familiar with resources developed by the Citizenship Foundation. But be quick, because there is limited availability. So this is on Friday the 6th of November 2015, and it's very reasonable at £274.99 plus VAT per delegate, and they're discounted rates if you want to send more than one person from your school. So that's all really good. Now, Go Givers say that they are a cross-curricular educational program that supports children's spiritual, moral, social and cultural learning, and that's what SMSC means. They are an initiative of the Citizenship Foundation. There's the Citizenship Foundation if you want to see their website, which is an independent education and participation charity that encourages and enables young people to engage in democratic society. Their materials have been developed by their team of former primary school teachers in England, so that's really inspiring. So who are they then? As well, I've just said who they are, but let's have a look at their partners. It's the usual suspects. We've got Barclays and Aviva and BBC Worldwide. Who else have we got? We've got Blackstone and British Gas. We've got HM Courts and Tribunal Service. I'm pretty sure we've been through this list before, but it's worth going through it again. We've got JP Morgan, of course.
Is that Matrix Chambers?
That is Matrix Chambers, yes. Matrix Chambers have their mitts in everything these days. There's the National Grid. And let's not forget Olswang, the law firm. We've got Rio Tinto and Sky and Santander, because we can't do without even more corrupt banking in these things. And who are their funders? Well, it's the Cabinet Office. There we go again. Cabinet Office, one of their funders, Comic Relief, and the Law Society. So that's good. I'm sure we all feel safer in our beds knowing that we've such training as this going on, don't we? What do you say?
Spiritual, moral, social, cultural education used to be called life. None of this was provided by the state. We had a very vibrant spiritual, moral, cultural, social life, and we don't need that from the government, because that forms essentially thought control. That's shaping the population. That's you are the product. It would be nice to think that the state could look after teaching such things as how to read, basic numeracy, and giving people access to and a love of the vast amount of literature and knowledge that is out there. I sadly don't think that's quite what we're doing.
I'm sorry, David, you just don't get it at all. We're living in a post-industrial, post-democratic, post-education established, country and world, and we don't need these things. We don't need these basic fundamental skills of how to count, how to read, and how to write.
If I can quote John Dewey, and I can probably just about do it from memory, that these ideas that you've discussed there, Mike, will spoil the harmony of the new world which is to come by having people who can think for themselves. That's a slight paraphrase, but that's basically the thrust.
Well, and we'll just leave it there. Fantastic. Thank you very much, David, for joining us. Now, unfortunately, there is no UK column news on Monday. We've got other things to do. We will be back on Tuesday, and we'll be joined by Mike Mitchum from Stop Smart Meters. So do join us then. Have a good weekend in the meantime. Thank you again for joining us, David.
Thank you.
And we'll see you on Tuesday, 1 p.m. as usual. Bye-bye.